I feel that trade is really, really important. I feel when you give people back their human rights, but you give them back their tools to work on their own land, you give them back their dignity, you give them back their will to live, and that's why trade is so important. That's the big piece of this puzzle.
Well, this is kind of sort of everything in my life is represented on my hands. You know, that's obviously this is to do with Oxfam. This is the main thing, is an equal sign about our commitment to fair trade and always talking about fair trade and promoting it wherever possible. So that's the main thing, that equals sign.
We are living in a world that has enough productive potential to adequately feed, house, clothe, and care for every single human being on the face of this earth. The reason this cannot be accomplished today is because of the fact that the production and distribution of wealth is organized on the basis of the buying and the selling of trade.
Fair trade is a system that is making sure that people in developing countries get a fair price for the products that they produce. In case of coffee, most farmers in developing countries who are in the fair trade system are guaranteed $1.21 US for a pound of coffee, whereas under free trade terms, their prices for coffee fluctuates wildly with the amount of coffee available. So it's basically depending on supply and demand. The IMF and the World Bank and the WTO are three organizations that were actually created historically to promote and develop trade across international borders. The IMF particularly right now is the organization that tries to make sure that there's stability in the international monetary system. Things like exchange rates, making sure that there's no wild fluctuations in interest rates that have a critical impact on world trade. The World Bank is an organization that is a bank. It provides funding for developing countries, essentially for helping them with the infrastructure development. And the WTO is the organization that is attempting to make sure that rules of trade are fair for everybody.
The IMF primarily does advisory services. It is not a bank. Many people have this understanding that International Monetary Fund is basically an organization that gives out money. It doesn't give out money. It is trying to make sure that it does two things. It tries to stabilize the country's finances. Secondly, it provides advice to these countries in order that these countries are not bankrupt, for example.
In rural communities across Asia, millions of farmers have been forced to abandon their farms in result of the free trade policy advocated by the WTO. Countries across Africa have seen their industries made bankrupt by the organization's favored free trade policy, with millions of jobs lost and millions of people thrown into long-term poverty. The WTO supports the liberalization of services such as water, health, and education as key elements of free trade. Yet, when multinational water companies took control of public services in Latin America, prices rose so much that the poor could no longer even afford normal water to drink.
Organizations like the World Trade Organization, WTO, it has basically set some rules whereby countries could trade with each other without any barriers for entry in terms of economics and finance in competition. So the WTO basically is saying to countries, unless you have open competition, you're not going to have countries investing in your country. For example, in Africa, you don't have the same level of internet, you don't have the same level of telecom penetration, you don't have the same infrastructure like we have in North America. But WTO basically says, hey, listen, you cannot have barriers in your country. You should allow foreign investors, foreign countries, or foreign companies to be able to come in to your country and be able to do investments.
So free trade, whenever the free trade meetings occur, periodically every 6 months, every 2 years, the WTO gets together every 2 years. And wherever it is, there's usually massive protests, typically by people who are from developing countries, because they want to make sure that their voices are heard either through media or through the ministerial representatives, that whatever is being discussed is in closed doors and there's very little room for the voices of the common people to be incorporated into the policies that are being actually set and ruled in. So it is difficult. You'll find that there's often a lot of violence in these protests because people are desperate. People in developing countries are getting poorer by the day, whereas the rich countries are getting richer because of the policy.
Free trade in the world, from a very pure economic perspective, people say, right, let's have free trade so that countries can benefit from selling their products and goods and services to other countries. I think there's two perspectives here. Free trade has not always been fair to all countries. In the context of free trade, many countries, and I have traveled to over 25 countries, they have suffered in that the countries were not ready for free trade, number one. Number two, the countries were not prepared, educated in terms of how to conduct free trade. Thirdly, the rules of the game were not totally established in order to benefit the country in the process of free trade. So, if you ask me the question, is free trade good for the world? I think free trade is great conceptually, but it needs to make sure that the policies governing free trade are actually implemented properly. First, developed in the context of benefit to everybody. Secondly, the fair trade practices within a free trade agreement, within the country, across countries, on a global basis, must be properly designed so that countries can actually benefit.
The biggest challenge for fair trade is to educate people on what it is. Take coffee, a farmer getting 50 cents for a pound of coffee, whereas it generates probably $15 a pound in your local coffee shop. So 70% of the final value of coffee is captured by the people in developed countries. So it's a huge difference in how much commodities are helping people in developing countries and in developed countries. Free trade is all about profits before people, whereas fair trade is people before profits. So whenever these big ministerial meetings of the WTO and the G8 are taking place, you'll find that there's thousands people who are descending on this area to protest against some of the rules that are being imposed on these developing countries.
In the interest of promoting free trade, some countries have the opinion that the whole world is becoming like one big oligopoly, where few companies of those countries are controlling the whole world. That is not free trade. That is really another version of monopoly or oligopoly, where few companies are controlling the whole world. That is not benefiting anybody. And that has been the whole criticism of globalization in the context of free trade and free trade agreements, because this globalization has had some very serious negative impacts. And that's my personal opinion.
As long as the free trade system is allowed to continue, there's really nothing much that we can do to try and stop it. However, another world is possible. After all, it would have to be another world in order to stop world problems such as hunger, poverty, and disease.
In conclusion, if you can be told what you can see or read, then it follows that you can be told what to say or think.